Welcome to Forum 360. I'm Leslie Ungar, your host today. Thank you for joining us for our global outlook with a local view. We admire them, we're envious of them, we respect them, we want to be them, and at times we want to get rid of them. Who are they? They are the CEOs of our major organizations and institutions. Who they are can change the whole footprint of a city or Northeast Ohio, and sometimes the world. Recently, Northeast Ohio got 2 new CEO-type leaders, and they are both women. The Akron Urban League appointed Sadie Winlock as their new Chief President and CEO, and the Home Builders Association of Akron has given us Lori Howerton as Executive Vice President. Welcome to both of you, to the area and to your offices and to the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, let's look at the path each of you took to get to this point in your career. If we could wind the clock back and you were 5 or 10 years old, would you have said, an executive type person is what I want to be when I grow up? Or would you have said a fireman or a doctor or a lawyer or a rock star? What would you have said when you were 5 or 10 years old? Sadie?
Well, actually, I wanted to be a prima ballerina.
Ah.
I started dancing very late, at the age of 14, but I had some people around me who really saw the talent in me. And by the time I was 16, I had performed ballet and modern dance throughout the entire state of North Carolina, where I'm from. And so my parents sent me to New York for a 2-week graduation gift, and I stayed 6 years. Because New York is the mecca of dance. But I realized once I got there, I wasn't as good as I thought I was. I was good enough for North Carolina, but not good enough for the mecca of dance. But I learned that I was very good at choreography. And if you know anything about choreography, it's the creation of dance. You have to be able, like Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. You have to know how it wants to end, and then you back into where you started. And so that really translated into strategic planning, and that's exactly what I do now.
How interesting. And Lori, if someone asked you at 5 or 10, or if you think back to a 5 or 10-year-old Lori, what would you have thought you wanted to be when you grew up?
Not a ballerina. How about a teacher? Many a day I spent in front of a chalkboard with a dictionary teaching my imaginary friends how to read. And if I wasn't doing that, it was helping the animals on my bed and thinking about being a pediatrician. So it's always been about helping people and making people the best that they can be, but never in an executive leadership position.
Now, tell us briefly, so from ballerina to faux teacher, tell us briefly about how what that journey looked like, both for the audience, but also for perhaps people listening in the audience that are beginning a journey or haven't even started their journey yet. Can you give us a couple highlights or twists and turns of what your journey looked like? You know, sometimes I think people think it's a straight, expressway from the start to, okay, some type of leadership position, and don't realize the twists and turns and detours that it might have taken along the way.
Right. Well, clearly, no one could ever match prima ballerina with CEO. But I think if you think about it, the steps that you go through to become a dancer are pretty much like leading an organization. You have to be a team player. You need to know your own skills and the skills of others. And so I started out trying to dance, and then I ended up going to college and majoring in Spanish, because living in New York, I thought I wanted to be an interpreter at United Nations, which has nothing to do with dance, but still, like Lori said, it had something to do with serving others and being involved with bringing people together and creating something. And so the creativity part of it remained. So going through college, I got married when I was a junior in college. And then I decided, okay, it's time to go home, because I had my first child. And I actually finished college in North Carolina. And then I started working for the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, who at the time was Jimmy Green, as a communication specialist. And then I had a friend who worked in the insurance business and said, Sadie, you should try this. And I said, oh, heavens, no, that's nothing. I had no financial services background or anything like that. And I ended up working for Allstate Insurance Company for 30 years. But in each of those jobs, I was able to be creative. I was able to organize things, to bring people together, to create teams, to get a job done. So it all kind of connects. It connects eventually. But you don't start out thinking, I'm going to be a CEO. Some people do, but I think it just kind of happened naturally for me.
And Lori, what could you add from your journey?
I would absolutely agree with Sadie that it just kind of happens naturally. So my first natural happening was I was a swimmer when I was little. And about the 7th or 8th grade, they looked at me and said, you know, you're really pretty small. I'm a 5-foot-tall woman. And so we need help in the diving well, not in the swimming pool where they dive in and they're half of a length ahead of me. So I headed to the diving well, and little did I know that I was going to continue to dive in college. And so when it came time to choose a school, I ended up at the College of Worcester, which is a Division III school, so that I could continue to dive. Had quite a bit of success there, but also learned how to be a leader through my experiences in swimming and diving. In high school, I was actually selected as a co-captain of a swimming team, which really isn't heard of, to have a diver be selected as a co-captain. It's typically just the swimmers. And that same kind of leadership then happened when I was in college at the College of Worcester. The other thing that the College of Worcester did was help me learn to think and problem solve. It's a school that's based on independent thinking, and as a leader, that's really what's required, is to be an independent thinker. You have to be able to take all the facts in from all the different perspectives that you're presented, assimilate those facts, and then come up with your independent thinking and what's best for the organization to move it forward.
Now, you said that as a dancer, you know, that was far from being a CEO, but see, in my mind, it really isn't, because you have dancing, you have diving, you know, athletics and the discipline and so much that is learned, you know, I think does apply. So I don't think it's coincidental that we have a diver here and we have a ballet dancer. We just need a pool. We need a pool and a tutu, and this show can go in another direction.
And I just want to make sure people understand you said ballet and not belly dancer.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, make sure that I did say that. When you think about all your experiences, what, if you could identify one thing that prepared you most to become executive vice president or to become CEO, what would that one thing be? Can you identify one thing that's been the most help to you?
I had a mentor. My first job out of the College of Worcester was at Ohio Bell at the time, which now ultimately has transitioned into AT&T. And I had a mentor in that organization who really taught me that you need to stand up for what's right. May not be the easiest, may not be the fastest, but it needs to be what's right. And I hold that near and dear to my heart today.
You know, it's so funny that Lori and I have so much in common, because I would say, too, that it was a lot of different mentors along the way. You know, I think there are mentors for a season, for a reason, and some mentors are for a lifetime. And so when I was very small, I remember my teacher, Mrs. Boston, who encouraged me to dance. I remember the friend who encouraged me to go into financial services. And I remember the business people that I ran into along my journey working for the lieutenant governor, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I was put in a lot of positions to lead over others. It seemed like I was always able to see the possibilities of how things could be done, how to solve problems, to apply those critical thinking skills, to exercise good judgment. And like Lori said, to be able to make those hard decisions and be able to live with it. You know, I'm interested in the opinions of others, but I'm also able to live with the idea that I have to make the final decision and have to live with that decision, and hoping that it's in the best interest of all the people that I serve.
Now, let me ask you, is there one thing that prepared you? Both of you are in areas that when you meet with your peers, they're going to be largely male. You know, the leadership in Northeast Ohio and Akron is going to be largely male. Is there anything in particular that has prepared you for living in working in still what is still largely a man's world?
Well, when I worked for Allstate, that definitely is a man's world. Financial services at the time that I entered it I worked for men and managed all white men. And so it was a very interesting experience, but I learned a lot along that journey. I realized initially, like most women, you think that you have to be like a man to lead. You have to use those same types of skills and approaches. But I also found that just being myself and being a woman, I bring a completely different perspective to the job. I'm much more sensitive about the needs of other people. And I think that perspective makes me really a stronger leader. I also understand how men think because of that experience, and so I'm able to apply that when communicating with them. I used to, at the prior organization I worked with, the YWCA in Greater Cleveland, we held classes on communicating, gender differences in communicating. And so I now understand what men expect in a conversation versus a woman. And sometimes you have to apply those skills.
I'm going to hold that to that thought in just a moment, but I want to kind of move over because even more than the average leader, you know, Laura, you work in the home building, which not only your peers as leaders are men, but you work in an area where you largely work with men. Are there different challenges for you than there are for other leaders?
You know, I think the biggest challenge is to earn their respect. And once you've earned their respect, they're your greatest advocate.
Right. I agree.
Now, from my perspective as a communication coach, I always say that men and women have different communication challenges. It's not that women have challenges and men don't, or vice versa. They're just different.
Yeah.
What are some communication or leadership challenges that you've encountered?
Well, as I was mentioning before, I think that men are, let's just start how we're raised as kids. Men are raised or reared to be competitive. And generally speaking, women are not. We are raised or reared to get along and to be a team player and to be more similar. Men are taught to stand out and to compete. And so when you're communicating with someone who has been brought up to really lead, to compete, and to be better, and you've been taught to get along, there's a conflict in how you communicate. And so I think knowing the differences between how we've each as a population have been reared has really helped me to understand how to communicate better. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but for someone listening or watching, give us one actual tip that somebody could take and implement as a result of what you've learned about how men and women may communicate differently. I'm going to ask each of you some little secret that you've learned that's helped you be more effective, whether it's in your office, at a small table, at a big table, or in a ballroom. Give us one tip.
I have a perfect example.
Okay.
So if you're in a boardroom and you have an idea, we normally will say, well, what about if we try this? And a man would say, I think this is how we should do it. And so that would be my tip. Don't start it with a question. Don't start it
tentative.
Right. Don't start it with a suggestion. Don't have a
It's
high
a
pitch
directive.
in your voice. You know, say, this is what I think we should do, and this is why.
And Lori, give us one little secret tip from your little arsenal that you've developed over the years.
Well, actually, Sadie did it without even recognizing that she did it. So as women, we always say, well, I feel, and a man says, I think. And Sadie did that as she presented the man's perspective. It was, I think we should do this. And we always say, well, I feel like. So you need to say, I think versus I feel.
Right.
Thank you for joining us on Forum 360 today. We're talking to two new executives in Northeast Ohio, Sadie Winlock from the Akron Urban League and Lori Howerton from the Greater Akron HBA. You have been in office since August, and you have been in office since October. And that's just of the same year. Okay, so we're just talking months. Tell me, what has been one single surprise that you've had in office once you assumed the reins from Carmine? Hey, Carmine, shout out to Carmine. Once you assumed the reins, what has been a surprise to you?
How much the Home Builders Association is a family. So when you think about it, there are 60, 90 builders who are all competitors with each other. But at the end of the day, when they come to the board table and meet with me, they are all working to improve the building industry. They put all that competition aside and we move forward together.
And that was a surprise to you from the difference of a chamber or something.
Correct.
And a surprise to you since August.
Well, for me, I've lived and managed in 5 different states. And the biggest surprise for me has been how welcoming the Akron community has been. The leadership, the community, it's just been overwhelming. When you move into a new area and assume a leadership role, you anticipate not such a warm reception because you're replacing someone that maybe the community really loved. I have been surprised and overwhelmed at how welcoming this community has been and how eager they are to support the Akron Urban League.
That's great. Well, speaking of the Akron Urban League, and you were just talking about HBA, so I'm going to shift for just a moment from you as individuals to ask you, why is each of your organizations important to a city, a community, or to a region? So can you tell us, say HBA, why is HBA, Home Builders Association, why is that important to a city?
We build your American dream. And as we do that, we employ people and create jobs, and we create a sense of presence. So we create homes that people want to be a part of a community. And those are really things that right now the community of Akron and of Summit County and Portage County, those communities are really trying to reestablish so that we don't have the brain drain. We can keep the millennials here. We have to create a sense of presence, and we have to have good, viable jobs for them.
Even if their home might look a little different, but it's still,
Absolutely.
they still need a home.
Could be an urban home.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And we're going to talk about millennials in just a minute, but let me ask you, in today's world, why is an urban league important to a city or a region?
Well, the Urban League started in 1910 under different names, and 3 organizations came together as a result of the Great Migration, as a result of Jim Crow laws, minorities moving from the South to the North to escape those laws. And so the focus was on housing and jobs and the quality of life and living. And so the Akron Urban League is focused on helping minorities, especially African Americans, live a quality life by helping them to become self-sufficient. When you help an individual become self-sufficient, they add value not only to themselves and their family, but they can help grow the economy of an area through home ownership, through employment, living wage employment, their children being able to go to college. And so the Akron Urban League supports home ownership, education, employment, and empowerment, overall empowerment of an individual to be self-sufficient.
Now, a minute ago we were talking about millennials. Many companies and individuals, look to millennials, to the next generation, talk about millennials, talk to millennials. What would you tell young people about how to prepare for either their known destination or their unknown career destination? What would you tell a millennial?
I think I would tell them what Lori and I have experienced is to identify mentors along the way who can support them in what they think they might want to do. Begin talking to people that they really respect and admire. And I think they'd be surprised approaching someone they may not know but they've read about to say, I'd really like to sit down and talk to you about your career path and the things that you did, and possibly become my mentor and help me make those crucial life decisions that will change what I want to be, what I want to do, and who I eventually become. So I think identifying mentors.
A mentor. Okay, and what would be something that you could identify?
I would piggyback off what Sadie has to say, except I would state it a little differently, which is learn from others. Because even if you are a manager of a team of Panera employees, there are things that you can learn from those employees. And if somebody has been there for 20 years and they're 60 years old, you can learn as much from them as you can from your peers or someone else. So I would simply say that you need to learn from others.
Now, I'm going to go back for a moment to the perspective of the female leader, the female CEO. I do a program using horses to teach people about their communication and leadership skills. And this past summer, I had a group that ended up being all women. It was my first all-women group. They got more results than any group I've ever had. But they were so collaborative that I thought I was going to be 150 by the time they got done. So they got so much more results, but in some ways they were tentative and collaborative to what might be a fault. What do you find about how women communicate, and what is one thing that you might tell women that would help them be more effective more quickly?
I think we talked a little bit about that earlier. I think the thing that most women struggle with is self-confidence. and being a little tentative about really stepping forward and taking on the leadership role. I would say get rid of the fear. You know, try not to be afraid of being yourself, and whatever that gut is telling you to do, just move forward and do it. The best way to learn is by making mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. And I think that's something so difficult for us to learn because we're taught to try to be perfect.
You know, one thing I've learned as a coach is that I would say that self-confidence is everyone's biggest challenge.
Yes.
Men just hide it better.
Absolutely.
But it's a challenge.
Yes.
Some aspect of communication and leadership it invokes the self-confidence with everyone in some
Yes.
way, whether they admit it or not. If your magic wand worked, how would you use it at the Urban League or HBA? If you could
Wow.
just...
Where can I get one is my first question.
I have one in my office, but I'm always telling my clients it doesn't work. I have the magic wand, but it doesn't work. But if yours did work, is there one change that you would want to use it to be able to quickly, change internally, externally, change in the mindset of the, American population, or change within your organization? If your magic wand worked, how would you use it?
If I had a magic wand, I would make sure that everyone could see the value of the Urban League and how we play a vital role in the development and growth of the Akron and Greater Akron community. That they see our programs and our services as vital to the livelihood and the lifeline of the area. That they really understood that we are and want to become the hub of collaborative services where we can bring people and organizations together to serve, to take a holistic approach to serve the underserved population. That would be what I'd want to do with that magic wand.
Thank you. And if your magic wand worked?
I would wave it over the young people and say that...
As a mother of 2 daughters, right?
Absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
okay.
And say that home building absolutely is a viable career. And that getting your hands dirty and having a work ethic and working hard towards an end result really does pay a lot of benefit for yourself and for others.
You know, some leaders are known for what Disney calls walking the park, walking the halls, knowing the names of employees and customers, clients, guests, patients, whatever it may be. Is that a style that you think is still relevant today?
Absolutely. I have a small staff of about 21 people, but the first thing I did prior to even starting the job, is that I got the pictures and the names of everyone who worked there so that I could start out day one really knowing everyone. I also have a technique of when I meet someone new, is I repeat the name back to them. Because
Does that work?
Yes, it does.
It does work. Okay.
Because I think the greatest sound to a person is the sound of their name.
True.
And if you can remember a person's name, you just instantly develop a relationship with them. So I think it's very crucial. I know right now we're very much into Facebook and all of the social media, but nothing takes the place of that personal conversation, that personal touch,
Yes.
and knowing a person's name and being able to relate to them on a personal basis. So yes, that is still very important.
And is there a way that you think that walking the park relates to home builders?
Absolutely.
Does that mean you're going to job sites?
I have.
We've heard it here first.
Absolutely.
In the middle of winter.
Why not, right? I might pick which ones are under roof. They're all the same. But I think the other thing that you communicate is that relationships are absolutely important. And in an age of technology where everyone is focused on their phone and we don't really know who's at the other end and you're not sure if they're taking time for you, when you have a personal engagement with that person, you are saying, you are important enough to me that I'm going to take time for you.
Right.
And I think that's a huge message.
I have just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to bounce off of you some things that some studies have said and ask you to answer in 1 or 2 word answers. Women leaders are held to a higher standard than men. Have you found that to be true?
Yes.
I would agree.
Family responsibilities make it difficult for women to be leaders. You found that to be true.
Workable.
We can balance.
Women aren't tough enough to be leaders.
False.
Absolutely not.
Women don't have access to the same connections as men have.
That's not necessarily true. I think that we have to work at it harder.
I think we have to go for it. We just have to take the chance and go for it.
Thank you for joining us on Forum 360. We talk about cities and regions. We talk about companies and footprints. Sometimes we forget that companies are made up of people and they're led by people. Two new people in the landscape of Northeast Ohio were our guests today. Sadie Winlock from the Akron Urban League and the new executive director at the Greater Akron Homebuilders Association, Lori Howerton. They have shared some of their ideas about how they're going to affect change. Perhaps they've inspired you to be a part of their vision. I'm Leslie Ungar, your host today. Thank you for joining us for our global outlook with a local view. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here and for saying yes when your names came up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Akronist.com, Hudson Cable, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.